Hey everybody, welcome back. Today we're starting the Roman Empire. I guess we kind of started it last time because we talked about Augustus, who's the first Roman emperor. But we're going to get totally into the Roman Empire today. So if you want to follow along, this is Rome 4 slideshow PDF file. Excuse me. Okay, so the Roman Empire lasts from 31 BC or 27 BC. Some historians pick different dates. One was the Battle of Actium in 31 BC. That's where Augustus defeated Antony. And then 27 BC is when he takes the name Augustus. So 31, 27 BC is kind of seen as the start of the empire. The Roman Empire lasts until AD 476 in the West. So in 476, the Western Roman Empire falls, but the Eastern Roman Empire lives on until AD 1453. So we're mostly going to focus on the West. If you look at slide 2, there's a poster of all the Roman emperors. There's no way we could cover every emperor or even mention every emperor. So I'm going to give you the highlights of a few. We'll spend more time later on kind of on emperors at the end of the empire to kind of explain how it fell. If you look at slide 3, that's a map of the Roman Republic in 44 BC when Caesar's assassinated. And then one more slide is the map of the highest or the farthest extent of Rome. This is a map under the Emperor Trajan in 117 AD. So you can see the Roman Empire basically goes from Britain down to Africa, from Spain all the way to, the Middle East, where Persia used to be. So it's a huge empire, thousands of miles. This is the empire of the emperors. Now there's this important term I want you to remember. It's called Pax Romana. This just means Roman peace. So the period from about 31 BC until AD 180, that's considered the time of Roman peace. That does not mean that there's no wars being fought. Rome is always fighting wars. This just means that there's not widespread civil war like what we've seen. And to be fair, there are some civil wars during this period, but they're just not long-lasting. This is generally an era of peace. So it starts with Augustus, and it's going to end with Marcus Aurelius, who we'll kind of talk about later. Augustus calls himself the Princeps Civitas, the first citizen of the state. And we talked about last time how the Principate, that's the system of government he established. Now, Augustus had a belief that the empire should not get too big. He actually laid down the borders, and he said you should not go past these boundaries. Don't go past the Rhine and the Danube. Let the Euphrates in the east be the boundary. He knew that if Rome got too big, it would cause problems, so emperors didn't really listen to him. Augustus's foreign policy, he put the legions on the frontiers of Rome to protect it. Like I said, don't expand too far. He reformed provincial government. During the time of the Republic, provincial governors basically used the provinces to enrich themselves. They would bleed the treasury dry just to enrich themselves. Augustus does a good job of saying, no, I want good government in the provinces. There was some problems, though, during Augustus's reign. There's this Germanic barbarian, Arminius, who revolts. This guy named Publius Quintilius Varus goes up to Germany, and he loses his legions in the Teutoburg forest, just gets wiped out. This makes Augustus really mad. That was kind of one of the big blunders of his reign. But Augustus's reform is overall seen as pretty good. He's concerned with Roman morality and virtue. He banished or sent his daughter into exile because she was basically an adulterer who slept around with tons of Romans. Wasn't seen as a good role model. So he banishes people in his own family who don't live up to good old Roman values. He revives a lot of religious ceremonies. He passed laws that would encourage Romans to have children. So basically, you'll get taxed at a higher rate if you don't have children than if you do have children. So he encourages childbirth. He maintains a professional army. Basically, the Roman army is made up of two groups: the legions, those are the Roman citizens, and the auxiliaries. Those might be, they're not Roman citizens, they're like helpers. Sometimes they're barbarians, but they're people that live kind of on the outskirts, and they kind of supplement the Roman military. Um, so Augustus uses those two groups from the military. He establishes new colonies throughout the empire. One of the things he builds is something called the Praetorian Guard. It's basically a group of imperial bodyguards. So it was like a group of soldiers that was in Rome to protect the emperor. You know, when he goes out, they follow him, they protect the family at the palace, stuff like that. They actually play a huge role in Roman history because sometimes the Praetorians will kill the emperor, assassinate him, and then they'll pick the next one. So it's almost like today the Secret Service, you know, if the American Secret Service that protects the president, you know, from time to time actually killed the president and then picked his successor, you know, that's basically what the Praetorian Guard will do. So we'll kind of see some examples of that. If you look at slide 12, that just kind of sums up Augustus's accomplishments. He expands the empire, reestablishes orderly government after all the chaos of the late Republic, and establishes the Pax Romana. The weakness of Augustus, and I don't know if he could have done anything else. This, you know, he probably, this is the best he could have done. But he builds the state up around his own personality, and that's fine as long as you have a good ruler like Augustus. But what happens when you get somebody crazy like Caligula or Nero, who we're going to talk about here in a second? If you get crazy emperors and everything's molded around them, then you got problems. Augustus decides to appoint his own successor. He actually had a bunch of princes, 5 or 6, who could have been the next emperor, but they all end up dying different ways. He ends up picking this guy named Tiberius. If you look at slide 15, we've got two groups of emperors, the Julio-Claudians and then the Flavians. So these are two groups we're going to look at. You don't have to memorize them. You don't have to know the dates. I just put it up there so you could see. Tiberius is the adopted son of Augustus. Tiberius is the emperor when Jesus is crucified. So that kind of gives you a point of reference. He was a very old Roman in the sense of tradition, sense of duty, virtue to the Roman state. He does have a lot of people executed throughout his reign, though. That's kind of seen as the downfall of him. A lot of Romans celebrated when he died because they were happy that the executions would end. Caligula, the next emperor, he was actually grew up in the army camps as a young boy, so he was always around the soldiers. He got nicknamed Caligula. That's not his real name. Caligula just means like little soldier's boots. So he becomes the next emperor. Actually, things go pretty well at first. He pardons the political enemies that Tiberius had locked up. He stops all the trials and the executions. During the reign of Tiberius, there were so many informers who would come and say, you know, I overheard a plot, that guy's going to try to kill you. Well, sometimes the informers just wanted that guy's property. So a lot of suspicion during the reign of Tiberius. So Caligula puts a stop to that. He reduces taxes at first. He starts having a lot of public entertainment. So a lot of people think at first Caligula's reign is going to be good. But then Caligula kind of went crazy. This might have always been the way he was, but he tries to have himself deified, made a god while he's still alive. He builds a bridge connecting the Palatine and the Capitoline Hills, basically from his palace to the temple, so he can communicate with the gods. He starts to party a lot. He raises the taxes. You know, the aristocrats, the citizens of Rome are paying for these lavish parties. He confiscates land. He kills people. He talks about making his horse consul. If you look at slide 19, I've got a quote. I think this is from Tacitus, but he really liked his horse. Caligula is assassinated by the Praetorian Guard. So the bodyguards of the emperor actually kill him, and they make they choose the next emperor, which is Claudius. The story goes that Claudius, he's Caligula's uncle. He's kind of seen as this slow of speech. He may have had a limp. He has some physical deformities. People thought he was harmless. When Caligula is killed, the story goes that Claudius is hiding behind a curtain, and the Praetorian guards find him, and he's kind of cowering, thinking they're going to kill him. So what the Praetorian Guard is, they decide to make Claudius the next emperor. So there's some famous paintings on slide 21 of that. Claudius is the safe bet because he's seen as harmless, but he actually turns out to be a pretty good emperor. He annexes the province of Britain, so Britain is a province of Rome for a while. He does kill his wife, Messalina. She tried to kill him. So there's a lot of, if you read a history of all the Roman emperors, it seems like every other emperor, like the family is plotting against themselves. There's always killings going on. He kills his wife, Messalina, and marries this lady named Agrippina. She's really important in Roman history. Now, if you look at slide 23, I've got a little chart there. Claudius and Messalina had a couple kids, Britannicus, that's a boy, and then Octavia, a girl. Well, when Claudius marries Agrippina, Agrippina already had a son named Nero. He's going to be the infamous Roman Emperor Nero coming up. So basically, Nero is probably going to become the next emperor, just like his mother wanted. He actually does a good job the first 5 years. There's good administration after Claudius dies, but he has issues with his mom. His mom is very controlling, and at first, Nero and his mother appear on Roman coins together. So it's almost like she's a co-ruler, co-empress. But then she starts to fall out of favor. A lot of historians just say that Nero thought she was a control freak and pushed back against her. Nero ends up killing his siblings, his step-siblings. He's always nervous about Britannicus. So there's a story about at this party, Nero, who's the emperor, basically tells Britannicus, I want you to sing a song. And Britannicus is really embarrassed. He doesn't want to sing. So Britannicus gets up, sings, does a terrible job, but everyone at the party kind of claps for him. They're like, hey, that's a hard thing to get up in front of a bunch of people and sing when you're uncomfortable. So they kind of empathize with the young Britannicus, and this makes Nero even more angry. There's two separate attempts where Nero tries to poison Britannicus, and he eventually does poison Britannicus. He later kills Octavia. It's really interesting, though, about Nero trying to kill his mother. He tries all kinds of things on her. Poison, violence, killing her with a sword, a dagger. The most kind of crazy thing he does is he wants to make it look like an accident. Nero actually has this ship built where you can pull a lever and it will make the ship break. So he actually sends his mother out on this ship and tries to pretend like, hey, I want you to go sailing around the Mediterranean, have fun, I'm being a good son. Well, she goes on the ship and one of the henchmen pulls a lever and the ship breaks and it's supposed to kill her. It doesn't kill her. Agrippina and one of her servants are swimming and a boat of Roman soldiers comes to rescue them, and she sends her servant ahead. They're floating in the water, and the servant goes up to the boat and says, I'm Agrippina, rescue me. And immediately the Roman soldiers kill her with the oars. So Agrippina saw her servant getting killed. So Agrippina, avoids the Romans in the rowboat, and she gets to shore. And she basically goes to her son. She plays stupid and says, oh my gosh, the ship fell apart. I was barely saved. Nero kind of freaks out because he's like, God, does my mom know I tried to kill her? What Nero ends up doing is he frames her. There's a servant from Agrippina that comes to Nero, and Tacitus, the historian who writes about the story, says that when Agrippina's messenger came to Nero, Nero literally threw his sword down at his feet and then said, that sword, you were just about to kill me, and then has the servant arrested, and then Nero sends his henchmen to his mother. Supposedly, Agrippina, when the soldiers came to kill her, she said, "Strike here," and she pointed to her womb because she said, out of my womb came Nero, and now he's going to have me killed, so strike me here. The soldiers kill her. So Nero ends up killing his whole family pretty much. Um, then Nero kind of goes crazy. I've got some quotes from Tacitus you can read. But basically, Nero starts throwing parties. He goes out with his friends and they go beat up random Roman citizens. There's one story about how Nero and his group of his little gang of, young guys, they go around punching people and going to brothels and establishments. And supposedly Nero goes up and starts picking on this random guy, and this random guy fights back. He's a senator, but when he realizes that the emperor is the one picking on him, he goes and commits suicide because he fought back. So a lot of craziness going on. One of the biggest events of Rome is the Great Fire of 64. The fire breaks out, burns for multiple days. It actually gets put out, and then it starts again. There's a rumor that Nero started the fire because he wanted to build a new palace in part of the city, so he had to destroy it. Nero does end up building the Golden House, his palace. So, some historians think Nero did it. Some say it was an accident. But Tacitus, I don't have my book, so I'm not going to read the page number. But Tacitus talks about how Nero ends up punishing the Christians because they're this new group. The Christians meet in secret. If you're familiar with Christianity, there's something called the Eucharist. That's where Christians drink wine and eat bread just to remember the sacrifice of Jesus. But if you read the Bible, it talks about the flesh of Jesus and the blood of Jesus. So there were a lot of Romans who literally thought that Christians were cannibals because they talk about eating the flesh and drinking the blood. Christians would call each other brother and sisters. So there were all these rumors that Christians practiced incest because they're married to their brothers and sisters, which, that stuff's not true, but a lot of Romans actually thought it was. So there's a lot of suspicion about Christians in Rome. According to Tacitus, Nero blames the Christians for starting the fire, and he'll dress them up with the skins of animals and then put them out and have dogs or wolves or bears or whatever attack them. So he has animals kill them. There's passages in Tacitus where the Christians are put on poles and they have like oil or tar around them and they're burned as human torches at night. So this is kind of seen as one of the first Roman persecutions of Christians, but Nero does that. Eventually, enough people have had it with Nero, so they plan to assassinate him. Nero ends up committing suicide because everyone turns against him. A slave of Nero's helps kill him. This happens in AD 68. So in AD 68, AD 69, you actually have a civil war in Rome. Now it doesn't quite last a year because this general Vespasian ends up winning pretty quickly, and then things are peaceful again. But there's four army commanders who basically try to take over being emperor after Nero's death. Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. Vespasian ends up winning. But basically, if you look at slide 38, emperors can pick their successors. That's what Augustus, the first emperor, did with Tiberius. The Praetorian Guard could pick the successor. That's what they did when they killed Caligula and made Claudius his successor. And now the legions or the soldiers start to nominate commanders. So some of these guys, some of these four emperors that tried to be emperor, not all of them wanted it. Sometimes the army would just declare one of them emperor and then they would go to war. So basically, you have a lot of uncertainty about how to pick the next emperor. Tacitus famously says the secret is out. An emperor can be made elsewhere than in Rome. So Vespasian wins this time. He inherits some wars. He was actually in the east fighting against the Jews because there was a Jewish revolt that broke out in the mid-60s in Judea. So one of the causes is, the Jews just don't like being ruled by the Romans. Roman taxation. The Jews were very nationalistic. They want their own country. Um, so there's problems in the East with the Romans and the Jews. Um, Vespasian, in the middle of this Jewish revolt, has to go back and fight the civil wars, defeat the other three guys, and then he's emperor. He sends his son Titus to mop up fighting in this Jewish war. Jerusalem is laid siege to in AD 70. The Romans starve Jerusalem into submission. They destroy the Jewish temple. They carry back all the wealth of the Jewish temple back to Rome. If you look at slide 43, I got a picture up there. That's a famous painting. And then something called Titus's Arch. It just commemorates defeating the Jews and destroying the temple. Another famous thing done by Vespasian is the Colosseum was built. This is probably the most famous building in ancient Rome. Vespasian doesn't rule, or he rules a while, then he dies. His two sons end up ruling. Titus rules for a couple years. About the only thing really famous during his reign is that Vesuvius erupts and Pompey is buried. Domitian, the younger brother of Titus, he sends a fleet to sail around Britain, proves it's an island. He ends up getting assassinated. So then you have something called the Five Good Emperors. So if you look at slide 49, Nerva, Trajan, Hadrian, Antoninus Pius, and Marcus Aurelius. These guys were considered some of the best emperors Rome ever had. They're honest for the most part. They don't go around assassinating political rivals. They're respectful of the Senate. They're good military commanders. They protect Rome's borders. So basically, they're just good military commanders and good administrators of justice, and they don't have any personal flaws like Nero or Caligula. They don't throw parties all the time. They don't go out and beat up Romans. They don't assassinate rivals. They're pretty honest for the most part. So this era of five good emperors, it's an era of peace and stability. They're not power hungry. So most historians think these five guys did a good job. One of them, Hadrian, built a famous wall in Great Britain. It's called Hadrian's Wall. There's all kinds of reforms in the bureaucracy. There's ways that you can serve in the military and the civil service. Basically, not all Romans are fit for the military, so you can kind of get drafted into the civil service. I got a picture there on slide 52. Some of Hadrian's Wall still exists. It was a lot taller back in the day, but you can still see it. Marcus Aurelius, he's pretty interesting. I'm not going to share much about him, but he gets nicknamed the Philosopher Emperor. He actually wrote a book called Meditations, and you can still get it today. It survived. It's just his kind of philosophical, ideas about life. It's pretty interesting. I actually like reading it. He's got some pretty cool things to say about life. I've got a couple quotes of him you can kind of read. I'm not going to read them to you, but these are from his books. Life in Imperial Rome. There were about 1 million people in the city of Rome during the time of the emperors. Rome has beautiful buildings. They have apartments. They have streets. They do have poor drainage. They did have sewer systems, but it's still the ancient world. They had all kinds of things called no dumping rules, basically saying you can't dump bodies or garbage or dead animals, in the street, because then it just washes down and we all have to deal with it. But Rome had running water. They had aqueducts, bring water from the nearby hills and mountains. So Rome's a pretty amazing place to be. I got a map on slide 61. You can kind of see all the different buildings. I got some pictures of some aqueducts on slide 62. The Pantheon, one of the most famous buildings in Rome, on slide 63. Then I got an inside picture of it. So Rome's a pretty amazing place. Roman education, I'm not going to talk much about it. A lot of Romans were educated at home. Education, a big part of it was moral conduct. We're not trying to fill you full of like facts or information, but trying to make you a person who will behave Roman, carry on the Roman traditions. So, hard work, service to the state, respect for the gods, respect for your elders, knowing your place in society. Um, but, there were private tutors. There's a lot of Greeks that are in Rome, and the Romans will hire Greek tutors to teach their children. So there's a lot of private stuff going on as well as far as education. Entertainment, gladiatorial events are probably one of the biggest things. Criminals, slaves, free men fought as gladiators. I got a YouTube clip if you want to watch it there. Um, I got a couple of quotes from Cassius Dio. He's a Roman historian, just kind of talking about there's this one emperor who actually goes out and fights, and he cuts the head off of ostriches and like waves the head at emperor or the senators watching to kind of tell them like you might be next. So all kinds of crazy things going on. They staged naval battles in the Colosseum. Um, they would kill thousands of animals at a time. The Roman Empire stretches, like I said, from Britain to North Africa to Spain to the Middle East. So think of all the wild animals that you have access to. I mean, they bring lions and tigers and bears and ostriches and hyenas and, all kinds of elephants. They just bring all kinds of crazy animals to Rome to basically show them off or to be killed in spectacles. Chariot racing is another big form of entertainment. Um, I got a couple clips there of some chariot races from the movie Ben-Hur. It's kind of cool to watch them race, but that was kind of the other big entertainment of the day. Okay, so kind of rushed through a lot of emperors. Like I said, I'm just kind of mentioning some of them. We could have a whole course just on the emperors, so it's kind of hard to pick and choose what to talk about. But generally, the first 2 centuries, of the Roman Empire are seen as pretty stable. The 3rd century, so like the year 200 to 300, that's seen as a pretty rough time in Roman history. Um, Things go downhill for the Romans in the 3rd century. Between, I think, 211 and 284 AD, there's something like 24 legitimate emperors. There's lots of people who claim to be emperor but aren't. Like an army commander makes himself emperor. Um, all but 3 of the emperors during those years, those 60 some, 70 some years, die from assassination or from their own soldiers. Uh, all but 3 of them, the rest of them die violently. The 3rd century is sometimes called the age of the barrack commanders because you've got so many army commanders claiming to be emperor. So the next slideshow we'll talk about kind of the problems that Rome has in the 3rd century, and then we'll kind of see how this guy named Diocletian helped fix the Roman Empire for a while.